Hello and welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Planner Podcast. Today, I have got an early Christmas present for you. There is likely, at some point in the next 2 years, going to be a new IBR. So this is in contrast to old IBR and new IBR. Now the Biden administration seems poised to be creating, starting probably in the middle of 2023, a new IBR. If you're confused, good, because I would be shocked if you weren't. So this is tentatively called the Expanded Income-Contingent Repayment Program, EICR. I guess this is sort of a bureaucracy at its finest. EICR is probably one of the worst names you could think of, just because it's just everything about the student loan program in one little sentence. EICR is what they are calling this plan tentatively, and I need to tell you at a high level what the heck is going on right now with student loans. I don't know if you've noticed, but Washington is a mess, and Congress can't seem to pass much of anything except for, one big transformative bill at a time. Furthermore, these bills have to be very limited in the cost for political purposes on both sides. So you can't have it be too expensive and you can't have it be too small, but you have to have it sort of be just right to fit everything that you want to fit into it. So student debt cancellation, if you put it into one of these reconciliation bills, would be very expensive and would drive up the cost of these bills for CBO scoring. CBO is the Congressional Budget Office. Democrats need these bills to be below a certain number, and that is why they're not including any kind of student debt relief in these bills directly. What they're doing instead is trying to sort of go around Congress with executive actions and rulemaking and regulations that help students without actually showing up anywhere on the bottom line where they would actually have to pay for it. So in terms of what exactly is going on, consider all of the actions around PSLF, right? President Biden claiming emergency authority due to the pandemic to sort of accept any payment on any loan going back basically permanently, until the student loan program started. If you have direct loans, then you can count any payment. And if you have non-direct loans, then you have to consolidate those first before you can get credit applied to those. So that's an example of an executive action the Biden administration has taken that was very carefully thought out to withstand legal challenges, because the president's not claiming broad-based cancellation authority. He's claiming narrow authority due to the pandemic, due to a national emergency in the HEROES Act of 2003. So that's why they had to put an expiration date on that order. So that's why you have to apply by October 31st, 2022, because they couldn't make it open-ended due to the structure of this order to withstand legal challenges. Now, what are the Democrats thinking might happen after October 31st, 2022? They might not have complete control of Congress anymore. So a lot of these actions are sort of front-loaded on student loans, and that's one thing that I'm kind of expecting is a whole lot of changes to student loans between now and the middle of 2023. And then it's probably going to be a pause, and very little about student loans will probably be discussed or enacted, I should say, until 2025, depending on who's in power after the 2024 elections. So we really do have to pay attention a lot in 2022 and 2023 to see how people might be affected by this. And so what is going on besides PSLF? So, President Biden made another order to forgive people that are disabled on their student loans, people that have had schools defraud them, right? So those are more automatic type orders where the Biden administration is looking at matching people's disability status with the Social Security Administration. I believe it was the Trump administration that ordered the same for the Department of Veterans Affairs to sort of automatically match those records to get those loans forgiven. So, so there's a lot of sort of tinkering around the edges. The PSLF action is going to be extraordinarily awesome for a lot of our listeners, and it's going to be extraordinarily expensive. I don't think that anybody really is aware of how expensive this is going to be. It's going to push up some of these political battles and bad headlines. I call a bad headline something that sort of draws attention in the Wall Street Journal to some unsympathetic doctor driving a new Tesla, right? So you have to watch out for those kind of headlines. Don't freak out when you see them, because the PSLF program is not going away for anybody that has in their promissory notes, which is anybody who's already enrolled in school in any program or who's graduated. So you don't have to worry about it from that perspective. But, in terms of noise, I know a lot of times my inbox sort of correlates to how much anxiety people have in terms of how many emails I have in there. Honestly, sometimes I feel like I need to go take a walk and take deep breaths. It's sort of like certain things get announced sometimes and people get scared, and the team starts working overdrive to try to get to everyone's emails. So I do appreciate them, though. I mean, that's why we're here, is to help you, right? But so anyways, what else is going on, right? I just wanted to give you kind of the backdrop of what's going on exactly with student loan, legislation and student loan executive actions and things like that. So we talked about why the Democrats aren't putting anything in a congressional bill. So what are they doing next? So they've done this stuff on PSLF. They've done this stuff on disability and defrauded students from for-profit schools and things like that. So what are they going to do for everybody else? Well, that is the purpose of this negotiated rulemaking committee. This is something that is a very long and drawn-out process where they have to allow public comment. They have to allow for sort of this transparent process where people have to film the recording, or film the proceedings, I should say, and they post it on YouTube. I've watched several of these, and each of the major constituency groups decided on by the administration gets nominated and selected for this committee. So you have a seat on there for legal aid. You have a seat on there for state institutions. You have a seat on there for FFEL lenders, for for-profit schools. And it's my understanding that the group has to be unanimous on proposed changes for them to be enacted as is. And if they're not, then it gets kicked back to the Department of Education to sort of decide what the language should be. So this negotiated rulemaking is important because it's how the pay and the repay plans were created. What you'll notice is pay and repay don't actually exist anywhere in law. Like, Congress did not say, we shall have the pay plan, we shall have the repay plan. And sometimes people ask me, hey, oh boy, that's pretty scary to me. Does that mean that those could get taken away by a future administration that's not as sympathetic to student loan borrowers? The answer is theoretically, yes, they could be. Just as IBR theoretically could be taken away in the sense that it's in a statute in law that a future Congress could replace with something else. But if you look at the way both parties have viewed these plans, they view it as a promissory note contract with the borrower. In other words, once that plan is in the person's promissory note, their view, the Department of Education's view, both parties, is that they cannot touch that plan for that borrower that has that option under their promissory note. That's a big deal for reasons we'll discuss in a second. So let's talk about how the current mess of IBR programs came about. In 1993, there was a statute created that created the ICR program. ICR is specifically limited to direct loans, and the statute says that you can have a period of forgiveness for no more than 25 years and for a percentage of income no more than 20%. That's important. We're going to come back to that law. And remember what I said, no more than 25 years, no more than 20% of income, only direct loans can use it. So at that time, there was a whole bunch of FFEL loans existing, and the direct loan program was pretty new, I believe, around that time. So then in 2007, something got created called Public Service Loan Forgiveness. And what happened was the College Cost Reduction Act of 2007. So this was a bipartisan act in the sense that President Bush signed it, the Democratic Congress passed it. I don't know who the Senate was controlled by at the time, but this is a bill that defined old IBR. So old IBR is statutory, which means that it can't really be repealed pretty much at all unless Congress decides to do something explicitly. So it doesn't matter who is in Department of Education, they cannot get rid of old IBR because it's statutory, meaning it's in the statute, it's defined, so they can't get rid of it. So old IBR opened up options to people in the FFEL program. So FFEL borrowers, FFEL loans, right, that were issued before 2010, gained access to this income-based repayment plan. So that's one reason you see a lot of people that have FFEL loans, they will be on the IBR program. And the reason is because the ICR statute from 1993, of which pay and repay were derived from, says specifically that you can't use that for FFEL loans. So that's why they created this new law in 2007 that said, hey, let's have IBR. And forgive me if this is confusing. Feel free to rewind the podcast and re-listen to this section, because I know it's confusing. But in 93, ICR was 25 years to forgiveness and 20% of income with no PSLF and a poverty line deduction of 100% of the poverty line. In 2007, they said, let's make this a lot more generous. We're going to say 15% of income instead of 20. We're going to still keep it at 25 years to forgiveness for people not doing PSLF. And then PSLF is going to be for 10 years. So that was very generous, and some extremely intelligent lobbyists for the American Medical Association and the Bar Association got the rules written. This is really more for physicians, but got the rules written so that residency programs and employment at nonprofit hospitals would count towards qualifying employment for PSLF. And your dentists and veterinarians of the world that you could argue do serve the public with their practices got left out of that definition, as did plenty of other people like chiropractors or private practice pharmacists, right? It's sort of an arbitrary definition if you think about it, because if somebody's employed at a CVS, that person is helping the public with healthcare concerns just as much as somebody that's at a hospital that's a pharmacist, right? Except one person qualifies for tax-free loan forgiveness after 10 years, and one person had 25 years of forgiveness, paying 15% of their income. And when you look at 25 years until forgiveness and 15% of your income, a lot of people would not want to go through that. So you would probably pay that back. In fact, if your debt-to-income ratio was anything below 2 to 1, you would want to probably pay that loan back if you're in the private sector. So then there was a new bill. So President Obama won in a landslide in 2008 and swept away the limitations on what they could do by having a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. He had 60 senators, Democratic senators in the Senate, and they passed the Affordable Care Act. Another one of the things they did was something called SAFRA, the Student Aid and Fiscal Responsibility Act, I believe is what it stood for, in 2010. In this bill, what President Obama did, or what I guess I should say Congress and the administration did, is they defined new IBR. So remember, there's ICR and there's IBR, which I now call old IBR because it's the original IBR. So it kind of makes sense that if you have ICR and then old IBR is way better than the ICR plan that was from the 90s. So basically everybody was switching into income-based repayment around that time, especially because of the pandemic, not the pandemic recession, goodness, the Great Recession of 2008. My recessions are running together, folks. So anyways, if you think about 2010 when they passed this bill, what did this bill say? So they defined new IBR in a statute. And in this statute, it said that you would pay 10% of your income with 150% of the poverty line for 20 years. In other words, it made old IBR even more generous. It said we're going to take old IBR and update it to new IBR, and effectively what this new IBR plan was literally basically pay as you earn. If you look at the definitions of pay as you earn and and new IBR, they're basically the same thing. So you might say, well, why the heck did they create another plan called pay as you earn? And the reason was because in this statute, it was a reconciliation bill, which limits what you can do, I believe, in the bill. And don't quote me on this, but remember Scott Brown won the Senate seat in Massachusetts that almost derailed the Affordable Care Act. Actually, it did significantly influence the final product because they had to pass the Senate version that had already been passed, I believe, to get it through. So anyways, that might have influenced what they had to do with new IBR in terms of the way they defined it to limit the cost of everything through reconciliation. The new IBR plan said that you had to be a new borrower as of July of 2014 to qualify. And that's 10% of your income for 20 years. So it's way better than old IBR, right? So remember, you have old IBR, now you have new IBR that's not for anybody until July of 2014, basically. That was passed in 2010 during the Affordable Care Act era. The problem with that is a whole lot of people couldn't qualify for that lower payment. So now you have a lot of people that have higher payments under the old IBR that would love to get access to that new plan, but the way Congress wrote the rules, they're not eligible. Now we come to a major moment in the rewriting of the student loan rules, which is sort of continuing to this day. President Obama was running for re-election in 2012. think about the states that were on the political map. Iowa was one of them. I believe it was Iowa that President Obama gave a speech to for their senior class. It was graduating in 2012. That was my class, actually. So no, I wasn't at the speech. I didn't go to University of Iowa, but so a lot of you might be maybe listening graduated in the early 2010s or mid 2010s or maybe late 2000s. So he was giving this speech to this University of Iowa class. And think about a president. A president has a ton of policy stuff to keep track of. And I don't care how smart you are or how well read you are about all your policies, the fine print of policies is not going to be captured by the vast majority of politicians, including the president. I'm not saying that this was necessarily the case, but that would just be my guess. So President Obama talked about creating a new income-based repayment plan to allow this graduating class to pay a lower share of their income and get forgiveness at a faster rate. Then it was panic mode because, wait a second, the president just said this group of people could pay less, but they're not new borrowers as of July 2014, so they're not eligible for new IBR. So what do? So the administration had to scramble to come up with an income-based repayment plan that would help this graduating class of 2012 pay a lower percentage of their income on income-driven repayment options. And so how do you do that? Because Congress defined the statute very specifically. You had to be a new borrower as of July of 2014. And I'm keep saying July 2014. I hope that's the month, but it is 2014 specifically. That you have to be a new borrower to qualify for new IBR. So what they had to do is come up with a new plan that could get access. They could give access to this new plan to that graduating class specifically or later. And so the pay-as-you-earn plan was born. So the administration, through this rulemaking process, created pay-as-you-earn and said that you had to be a new borrower as of October 2007. And you had to also take out at least one loan after October 2011. Now, who would be the first group of people that could qualify for pay-as-you-earn without having to have done anything special, like borrowing from mom for the freshman year? It would be the class of 2012 because they started in the fall of 2008. The class before them started in the fall of 2007. They would have taken out a loan probably in September or August of 2007. So pay-as-you-earn was created as a way to get people access to new IBR sooner. And that Congress screwed up new IBR by defining it something that's way off in the future. And they probably did that again because of the fact that their bill was scored by the CBO and they had to keep it below a certain cost and make it qualify through reconciliation. And so they did it that way, and then they had to backtrack and try to bring this older group of borrowers along with these benefits, but they couldn't bring in everybody. Partly it's because FFEL borrowers are a powerful lobby, FFEL lenders, I should say, and they get billions of interest income off these loans, and they're always going to push back on changes to student loans that take away their interest income that these banks rely on. So we've got pay-as-you-earn. Now, what exactly is happening that creates repay? So I'm not 100% clear on the path for this, but basically what happened is there was some thoughts of, wow, these low payments are causing soaring interest amounts. If you're paying 10% of your income, oh my gosh, the interest balance is really ballooning on some of these. Plus, there was some concern. Remember that in the Obama administration, they actually did at one point propose a bill that would limit PSLF to $57,500, which is about the limit that someone could possibly take out on Stafford loans, because there was some concern that these forgiveness programs are disproportionately benefiting higher income earners. And so they created the revised pay-as-you-earn program that had a two-part kind of benefit. One would be 10% of your income for 20 years if you were an undergrad only borrower, or if you had graduate school loans as well, then it would be for 25 years. And they eliminated the ability to file taxes separately to benefit you. What they also did is they added an interest subsidy component because of the concern about the ballooning interest amounts, where you would get a 50% interest subsidy for periods of time when your payment wasn't covering the growing interest. Any leftover interest after you made your repay payment, the government would pay half of it. And that created a huge opportunity for residents because suddenly, back in the day, there was a big, refinancing business with SoFi and Laurel Road for residents who would refinance their student loans and residency to lock in a low rate, for residency with $100 a month payments. And then they would refinance again as attendings and lower their payment again, essentially. And that was a big business back in the sort of 2014, 2015, 2016 era. But then when revised pay-as-you-earn came out, residents pretty much started defaulting into just taking advantage of that interest subsidy during residency if they were planning on refinancing so that they could keep their options open with PSLF and then probably refinance as attendings anyway. So what's going on now? What's happening now? So obviously we're at a cultural moment around student debt. I think it's fair to say that there is a huge canceling student debt movement that is around today that was not around in the 2010s. And also just, I would say the energy on the progressive side of the aisle is significantly greater now than it was back during the Obama years. If you think about the Obama years, right, you would have been probably shut down talking about politics in the way Bernie Sanders talks about politics. But if you think about things now, you have a whole wing of the Democratic Party, right, about 100 people in the House that literally call themselves the Progressive Caucus. So I would say, I mean, this is, I guess, 538 that says this, that the Democratic Party, policy-wise, has been more comfortable with more progressive positions. And then your Republican Party, I think, has moved to the right as well. So you have this even more polarized political environment. And one of the things that's come out of that is a strong cancel student debt movement that's also a youth movement, and it's a lot of energy surrounding this. But the cancel student debt movement didn't go through Congress because they couldn't get something in a bill that they wanted to show the public that headline cost of it because they wanted to prioritize other things. And then they wanted to do it via executive action directly, but they didn't want to do that because they felt that the president, at least Speaker Pelosi has said this, she felt like the president did not have that authority to cancel student debt broadly, that had to be something that originated with Congress. Again, don't shoot the messenger. This is just what people have said. I like to analyze the student debt landscape and what I think will happen versus me trying to tell you what I think should happen. So just know that when I'm talking about this kind of stuff. Okay, so they've walled off the cancel student debt movement from executive action. They can't do it via the legislative branch. They could, by the way, I think, if they had bigger majorities in Congress, right? But with the narrow 50-50 Senate and with a bare majority in the House, right, they can't necessarily really do that. What now? So what do? Well, you go through the back door. And the back door is to possibly cancel student loan debt indirectly instead of directly. The CBO did a report on income-driven repayment plans at the request of some people in Congress. They published it in February of 2020. And guess what? Nobody paid attention to this because what happened a month later? The pandemic. So what's going on is a group of people that's working with the Department of Education right now is negotiating a new set of rules around student loans. It's going to affect things like PSLF, qualifying employers, the definition of income-based repayment for a new income-driven repayment plan, as well as other things like borrower defense to repayment, just everything, really. I mean, it's going to be pretty wide-ranging, and it's the one big action that they're going to take between now and the 2024 election. So whatever the rules come out of this, it's going to be around for a little while. And let me tell you what they're talking about for this EICR plan. This is the name that they've tentatively assigned to the new IBR plan. They're still coming up with a name for it. Now, one thing that we know about this plan is that it will absolutely not be available before summer of 2023. And most likely it could be available even later than that. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the first people sign up for this new IBR plan until late 2023, because these regulations take forever to get implemented and actually enacted by the servicers and everything. So what they're talking about mostly is three different levers that they're talking about pulling with this new IBR plan. They're thinking about what percent of the poverty line is the right amount to give someone before they take any part of someone's income for student loans. We have a progressive tax system in America. A marginal rate is typically higher than your effective rate. What I mean by that is, up to, say, $50,000 of income might be taxed at 12%, and then it might be 22, and then 32, and 24, and 32, and 35, and then 37%, right? But student loans, after you get that federal poverty line deduction, it's just a flat 10%. So one thing they're thinking about is saying, okay, the first $50K you earn, maybe we take 5% of it, and the next $50K, we take 10%. And they're also discussing whether or not they should shorten the time to forgiveness from 25 years or 20 years, possibly to something even less than that. So there's seats for main interest groups on these committees. Now, I will point out that the only people that could potentially be opposed to making IDR plans more generous might be the FFEL lender seat on the committee, which would be negatively impacted by people consolidating their loans to a better income-based repayment plan. For-profit schools probably are a wash. They're probably okay with more attractive forgiveness plans. You want to kind of think about who's on these committees and who's making the decisions. This is a very progressive committee. I think that the people that they appointed are very much in that consumer advocate kind of mold. And so they're pushing for some very aggressive things. So some of the people on this committee have called for allowing, instead of pay-as-you-earn being for 20 years, they've called for it to be 10 years. They've called for things like allowing for 400% of the poverty line instead of 150% of the poverty line. They've talked about allowing a marginal approach to taking a percent of income, so 5%, then 10%, et cetera. Now, I will say the people saying 400% of the poverty line, 10 years until forgiveness, I don't think that's got a shot at all. And I do think that something like 250% of the poverty line could have a shot. One of the reasons why I don't think that they would shorten the time to forgiveness for grad school folks is partly because if you think about PSLF, like one of the benefits, one of the incentives for doing PSLF is to attract people to the nonprofit and public sector. So if you allowed for a 10-year forgiveness period for people outside the public sector as well, then there really would be no incentive to work for a public sector employer, because then people could just go work for anybody and get the same benefits. So I don't think that you're going to see a 10-year, forgiveness date, or even a 15-year forgiveness date for grad school level people. What I do think possibly might happen for grad school level people is that they take the poverty line deduction from 150% to maybe 250%, which, effectively for most people could mean payments drop by about $100 to $200 a month lower than they are today. Now, another big question mark is, would they allow you to file separately, and how would they take into account spousal income? So the initial section they put this plan under was the pay and the repay sections. Why did they do that? Going back to the earlier part of my podcast when we talked about the ICR plan from the 90s, ICR says, well, first of all, old IBR and new IBR say, this is the forgiveness date, this is the percent of income, this is the poverty line. Whereas ICR is written a little bit more ambiguously, where they say no more than 25 years and no more than 20% of income. Well, the lawyers looked at that and said, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. It says no more than 25 years and no more than 20%, which means that we can make a new plan based on ICR authority and just make it less than that, because they said no more than, not it will be this. And so that's the reason why pay and repay are sort of children of this ICR statute. So the pay and the repay plans were born out of this statute, and that statute says you can only use it for direct loans, which is why pay and repay are only available to people that have direct student loans. So this new plan that they're coming out with has to be coming out of that pay and repay ICR kind of family of plans. And the repay plan, they did not allow people to file separately. What exactly is going to happen there with this new EICR or new IBR plan? Will they make it more like repay, or will they make it more like pay? That's hard to say right now. That's one of the things we're following, right? If they allow you to file taxes separately and they do 250% of the poverty line with 20 years until forgiveness, then a whole lot of people would probably want to switch from pay to this new plan. If they make it where you can't file taxes separately, and they make it 20 years until forgiveness and 250% of the poverty line, there's a lot of people that are limited to being able to, they can't participate in pay, that might want to switch from repay to this new plan because it has a faster time to forgiveness. One committee member representing the legal aid group said that they should create a new IBR plan. She didn't say new IBR. She said the new IBR plan should be so good that everybody wants to switch into it. And a lot of the people were really pushing Department of Ed for a very, very generous income-driven repayment plan. And also they wanted them to set it up so that new IDR plan was the standard defaulted plan that people just automatically get put into instead of the standard 10-year plan. Now, the discussion around that was interesting because one of the ideas was that they could make people who are defaulted on their student loans defaulted into a income-driven repayment plan, but they might not be able to default people that are not in default on their student loans into an income-driven repayment plan. This might be more possible to nudge people towards IDR, with the IRS giving people giving access to tax returns on a more automated basis to the Department of Education. But really, if you think about this, I think, could be a backdoor way to cancel student debt for certain populations of people. So one committee member asked for this new IBR plan to be 400% of the poverty line. So to be clear, if a family had 4 people in it and they were making $100,000 as a household, that family with a 400% of the poverty line deduction, that family would be paying $0 a month on this income-driven repayment plan. So imagine a scenario where essentially everyone with less than 100K of income is paying nothing on their student loans. That's why I don't think they're going to get 400% of the poverty line. I think that this is a very sophisticated group of people asking for 400% to make 250% poverty line seem more reasonable as an ask. So it's sort of like ask for way more than you want to actually get or think you're going to get, right? It's a negotiating tactic. In a situation here, you could have a family that makes 100K, and that family could also have 40,000 of student loan debt and pay almost nothing on it. And they're also discussing for payments that are $0 a month to create some sort of interest subsidy where interest might not accrue. I think the smart money is maybe on a 250% of the poverty line for this new IBR. But consider this, there are some issues with this that I don't know if they're going to get looked at. I don't know if the Department of Education is going to consider this or not, but the grad school folks out there are getting bigger subsidies than undergrad folks. Why is that? So undergrad debt is capped, right, because of the Stafford undergrad loan caps, and so that's why your average person's got $30,000. So you could be a single mom earning like $50K a year, but not have a chance of getting your $30,000 of student loan debt forgiven because, hey, the repay plan, with the 10% of your income is going to be $300 a month, and you're just going to pay that off. You're just not going to, you're not going to have anything left to forgive. And in some cases, it might kind of actually hurt you because the payments might be just enough where you're paying all the interest and a little bit of principal, but not enough where you're paying down the debt really rapidly. And that's one of the most common complaints that I get from people that have had student loan debt a long time is they're very frustrated that they're making significant payments, but their balance isn't declining very much. And so that's this real terrible trap where people pay amounts that are calculated that are just barely more than the interest, where almost all of your payment is going towards the interest and almost none of it's going to principal. And I think a lot of people don't really understand how the math of debt repayment works. It's not a criticism, it's just something that's not intuitive. You make a huge payment, you think your balance is going to be declining. But if you're not paying your loans, if you're not paying at least 1% of your balance every month, you're going to be in debt for a very long time because you're making maybe barely the interest payments plus a little extra. So currently, Repay says 20 years till forgiveness for undergrads and 25 years for graduate school loans. And so what might happen? Well, I think that there's a chance that we could see something similar to the Repay plan, but maybe they make it 15 years for undergrads and 20 years for grad school loans. And maybe they make it a higher percent of the poverty line, right? This is all speculative. This is based off of a rulemaking process. A lot of reporters that are in the student loan space don't even want to report on this right now because it's all speculative. It's all people just talking instead of actual rules that the administration's thinking about enacting. But it's a huge signal that this is the big student loan action the Biden administration's really planning on doing, is trying to go in through the back door, provide huge student loan relief through a new income-based repayment plan that will be very expensive and very beneficial for a lot of people. And who knows what the final text is going to be, but remember that this plan's not going to be open to you until at the earliest fall of 2023 is our plan. Now, what is this going to mean? Now we're going to have 5 IBR plans instead of 4. What are the chances that they make this IBR plan, this new IBR or EICR as they're talking about it, what are the chances that this plan is going to be better for absolutely everybody than the plan they're already on? I would say not that much. Like there could be a lot of people where this is not a much better option. There's a lot of FFEL borrowers that will be excluded from using this plan because of the ICR statute not including eligibility for FFEL loans. That's also something to consider. So when we did a survey of like what kind of relief do student loan borrowers want to get? We did this survey a couple years ago. One of the things I asked was, do you want another income-based repayment plan? I believe 1 or 2% of people said that was something that they wanted. In other words, this is like a hole in the head. That was one thing I think my granddad would say growing up. I need another one of this, like I need a hole in the head or something like that, right? So in other words, student loan borrowers really don't want another income-based repayment plan. Now that said, if you phrase the question, would you like to pay less on your student loans under a new income-based repayment plan? I think 75, 80% of people would say yes, right? I think it's just the desire of policymakers on both sides of the aisle is to simplify income-based repayment. But instead of doing this above board, where we're having the debates, we're having the discussions, we're having the CBO scoring, showing the actual cost of these different options, instead, because of dysfunction in both parties, both sides are trying to go behind each other's back and make plans outside of the usual process. And when you do that, you had the new ICR plan. If you made a new statute with IBR and just replaced the old ICR, Congress could do that. Right? Congress could have said, we're going to end ICR, we're going to make an IBR plan, and it's going to be the one plan. Then the future administrations would not have had the opening to make all of these additional repayment plans because the ICR statute would have been eliminated. But they allowed it, and they didn't touch it. And so administrations on both sides of the aisle are very aggressive with trying to get their policy priorities enacted by circumventing Congress if they're not able to do it directly. So you've got 5 IBR plans coming now instead of 4, and it sort of increases the chances that at some point something big will happen in Congress with student loans because it's not sustainable. You're already looking at the CBO report that I read in February 2020 talks about how basically there's this accounting standard that requires budget scorers to analyze the subsidies of things with a very low interest rate. In other words, they have to use an interest rate when they're calculating costs of things that's not realistic, right? And the CBO kind of talks about that. That's just what they have to do based on the rules. And if they said that if they used more market-based accounting for the cost of the student loan program, the subsidy on income-based repayment plans is around 40%. So anything you do from here on out to change IBR that makes it more generous than pay-as-you-earn is going to increase that subsidy rate from 40% something higher. And so if you think about creating a 250% of the poverty line deduction or messing around with the percent of income or moving up the years to forgiveness, if you do any of those things, then maybe you take that 40% forgiven amount and you bump it up to 50 or 60%, right? And if you're subsidizing 60% of all the loans someone takes out, well, wouldn't it be better wouldn't cancellation of some kind be a little bit more straightforward, right? I mean, that's kind of the concern around student loans in general, is that the systems that they've created are a mess. And it's all sort of designed with both parties trying to jockey for position using accounting gimmicks instead of being honest about the problem. And the other kind of thing that I think is kind of interesting is I think it's a huge conflict of interest the way the rulemaking happens and the regulations happen, because it gives a bunch of seats at the table to higher education officials representing their institutions. What do you think a higher education official wants with creating a new income-based repayment plan? Well, they want to make it so that the student feels the cost as little as possible without regard to the amount they're allowed to borrow. That might sound like a pro-student approach, and if certainly the allowing students to pay less for their education, is a pro-student thing. But the problem is when you have people from these universities helping to make new income-based repayment rules, this is the same thing as creating a bunch of new subsidies for higher education and tuition. And I think that that's a problem because it's not looking at the cost of higher education, right? Nobody wants to talk about the dirty little secret, which is, why does vet school cost $400,000 at some institutions? Why does dental school cost $100,000 a year, not including living expenses at NYU Dental School? Even at state schools, why does it cost so much? And that's a decision that's very uncomfortable because there's a lot of waste and a lot of taking advantage of students that goes on at these universities, at many universities around the country. And it's a little bit like the fox guarding the hen house with them rewriting the rules. I think that you're going to see benefits to students from this, But it's also kind of an interesting factor because to the extent that we create a student loan system that's just extremely inefficient, that doesn't help anybody, right? Like you would be better off if you had a more easy to understand cancellation system, because then at least borrowers wouldn't be so confused and they could get on with their lives and making decisions in their lives and buying houses, starting families, et cetera, without having to use a service like us transparently, right? And if at some point we become not useful anymore, we'll do something else. I think, knock on wood, I hope I'd be able to give financial planning to 100 families out of the several thousands that we've served, right? So I think that what our job is to be here to help you as long as the student loan system is a mess. I guess you could say self-interestedly, fortunately for our business, it looks like that complexity is going to continue, and it looks like there's a chance that it's even going to get worse. So that's unfortunate, but it's the reality. So definitely be paying attention to this negotiated rulemaking and the new IBR plan. A couple other things before I let you go today. The Fed loan group is moving on. People are getting emails from the Department of Education talking about increased forgiveness amounts, as well as people that are qualifying for complete forgiveness suddenly are getting their loans wiped on direct loans. That's starting to happen. So people are calling this like the Christmas student loan email kind of thing, or, Christmas in November or something. I don't know. People are calling it different things. But basically, there's these surprise emails going out where people log onto their Fed loan and the loans are gone. Now, remember, this is only for people who have made 120 payments or more on direct loans while employed full-time at a not-for-profit or public sector employer, and the payments can be on any kind of payment plan, and all that employment already has to be certified in the system. But those cancellation and forgiveness emails are starting to go out, so that's something to be paying attention to. That's going to be continued over the next several months, even past the Fed loan transfer, with Department of Education emailing people, letting them know how much they estimate their payment counts will increase by. There's still other things that we're monitoring in regards to that executive action on the PSLF waiver, specifically how are they going to treat loans that have different numbers of payments on them, and loans that were consolidated, into a consolidation loan. Are they going to use the loan that had the most credit or the fewest months of credit? We'll see. Also, we're getting more noise about Navient moving, Navient accounts moving. AidVantage seems to be contacting people more. So there's some people that are afraid of their payments not being recalculated. Don't worry about that. That's going to work out. I think that worst case scenario, your payment from pre-March 2020 is just going to continue if you were already signed up for an income-driven repayment plan when payments start up again after January 31st. And in the middle of all this chaos, it looks like I underhired. So one of the things that is a lot of business owners, I think, have struggled with during the pandemic is how do you balance lower temporary demand with potential higher demand after certain dates are over, right? Like, how do you balance having staff with the pandemic slowing demand, but then also having enough people so that when everybody comes back to the hotel resort in the summer and wonders where's all the staff? Well, business owners were struggling to keep people during that time, right? So I hired 2 new additional consultants, Dan and Molly, several months back. I was thinking that the payment and interest pause would end in September, and then it got extended to January 31st, which is fine, right? The issue is with the payments and interest starting up again and this unexpected PSLF news where people have to take active action to get that additional PSLF credit applied properly, we're having a lot more bookings than normal. And I could certainly go off and add a couple more consultants, but I would prefer to do quality control right now in a world where there's a lot of chaos and a lot of stuff happening with student loans. My preference is to go slow on this versus just double the size of the team to meet demand. So what that means for you is if you're trying to book a call or a follow-up call, you need to go to studentloanplanner.com/book. And you can schedule, I think, 60 to 90 days in advance. And you don't have to even use a credit card to schedule one. And if you want to get a plan around a certain date, I would do so now, because I am booked currently, my personal student loan consulting calendar, I'm booked until late January as I record this. And then the rest of the team, I believe, is booked for most days in November. If I just kind of look real time as I record this, the availability for the rest of November, there's maybe about 6 or 7 days open in November, and I'm recording this in early November, in that 0 to 200K consult segment. And then if I look at the 200K and above segment, There's even less availability because we kind of reserve those consults for the most experienced consultants, even though everybody at this point has had a couple hundred calls under their belt or more. So I wanted to mention that so that you don't get surprised if you send me an email in late November or December and say, hey, I'm ready to schedule something for early January. There's a good chance that we won't have a spot available for you, and you might have to wait till February or March. Or I guess you could try to find another service, but I like to think that we're the best in the world at this. And knock on wood, our reviews, if you go to studentloanplanner.com/rev, you can see that we're up to more than 1,000 reviews out of the 6,000 clients that we've had. And I think our average rating is something like 4.96 out of 5 stars or something really pretty high. So I take pride in making sure that quality is unbelievably good. And that's kind of why we're going a little bit slower on the hiring front than we maybe should from a service perspective. So I hope you don't get frustrated with us. I like to think that if you have your favorite breakfast spot that serves the best omelet in the world, you don't mind waiting an extra 30 minutes in line to make sure that the quality of the omelet's still amazing. Same sort of thing with renovating houses. Thought we were getting something done in November, and now it looks like it's not going to be ready until January because of all the just economic disruptions. So there's a lot of junk going on in the world right now. We're trying to adapt best we can. So I appreciate your patience. In the meantime, if you want to ask a question for the show, go to studentloanplanner.com/voicemail. I always love getting your questions. We answered a whole bunch of them on last week's podcast. Thank you all for listening. I certainly appreciate the feedback on the show. I appreciate it when folks send me notes just saying that they're enjoying the podcast. Please share it with your friends. I think that this is a great way to get free advice that's timely and you don't have to wait for by listening into the podcast. And I hope that it's as entertaining as student loan debt can be. Unfortunately, we don't have any whodunit kind of murder mystery stuff that we can weave into this to make it a little bit more fun, but I do the best I can. So maybe I'll try to throw in some more dad jokes for a couple more of these future pods. But thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful week.